talk series Tradition Witnessing Modern Age. We have wonderful moderator and wonderful our beloved Imam Suhaib Webb for the program. Inshallah, we will start with the Quran recitation from Imam Ismail Kamit. Then after that, I will introduce our moderator and read his bio and ask him to inform us his institute that he is president, Bayan Islamic Graduate School. And after that, we will have a little story about his last name, Turk, where does comes from. Then I will give the mic to our moderator, Brother Jihad, Imam Jihad, to start moderating and reading with the bio of Imam Suhaib Webb. And we will have a conversation with Imam Suhaib Webb. If you do have any comments and questions, please do not hesitate to type on YouTube channel. Then we will relay those questions to Imam and the moderator when they make in conversations to ask your questions to Imam Suhaib Webb. So this, and at the end of the program, we have wonderful Black History Month upcoming event that we would like to announce. There is a book reading contest about Bilal Habeshi radiallahu anh for the age of between 9 to 12 years, book reading contest, and author will be with us in upcoming event for this book reading contest. And we will have conversation about contest and we will close the program. So without further ado, I would like to invite Imam Ismail Kamit to start with a wonderful recitation of Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا سمعنا وأطعنا غفرانك ربنا وإليك المصير لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها لها ما كسبت وعليها ما اكتسبت ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين صدق الله العظيم. الفاتحة.
Thank you very much for beautiful recitation and of the universal message for mankind. May Allah, inshallah, hear and listen and practice. And without further ado, I would like to introduce President of Bayan Islamic Graduate School, Brother Jihad Turk. And before I read his bio, I want to ask the most important question, perhaps very most important question in this night. Where does last name comes from, Brother Jihad? If you can explain Turk. So there are, I think, lots of Turkish origin listening this program. So we would like to hear this one first and foremost.
First of all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. My name is Jihad Turk. When I traveled to Istanbul, they called me Mr. Turk. You are Mr. Turk. Welcome. So everyone assumed I was Turkish, but as an American kid growing up in Arizona, my mother is from Oklahoma, as Imam Suhaib is from Oklahoma. My father was born in Jerusalem, Palestine. He's Palestinian, but he immigrated to the States in 1956. But I asked him, I said, where did we get the name Turk? He didn't know. So when I traveled back to Palestine, I had to do some research, and I interviewed some of the elders of the clan. From my father was originally, even though he was born in Jerusalem, from the city of Hebron, Khalil. And there is a larger tribe named the Abu Snaina tribe. And it turns out that my father's grandfather was conscripted into the Ottoman Empire as an officer in World War I. And he fought in Lebanon against the Druze, and he led his troop there, and they were under siege, and they were starving, and they were surrounded and held up in a small castle. So he ordered his troops to eat the horses and donkeys to survive, and they did. And after the war, the Sultan invited him, as the story goes, to Istanbul and inquired. They said, are you the one? He inquired with my great-grandfather. He said, are you the one who ordered your troops to eat horses and donkeys, which are generally not halal, but under duress? He said, I was. He said, good job. And he made him his guest, and he stayed in Istanbul for some time before returning to Khalil, Hebron. And when he did, he was given the laqab, the nickname Abu Turki, which somehow got shortened to Turk when my father immigrated to the States in the 50s. So I'm not Turkish, but there's a connection to the Ottoman Empire through my great-grandfather. So there's some fondness to the Atrak, to the Turks there in across the globe.
This is wonderful story. I think with a couple of Turkish delight, we can make you Turk too. Maybe we should send you some more Turkish delight to eat. But nevertheless, we are the brothers and sisters of Adam, and brothers and sisters of Islam, and we are trying to become better Muslims in United States. So this topic is very important. But before further ado, I would like to read a little bit about Brother Jihad Turk's bio. Jihad Turk is the founding president and dean of Bayan Islamic Graduate School, preeminent Muslim institution of higher education offering accredited master's degrees in the fields of Islamic studies, leadership, education, and chaplaincy, as you can see in our video website. And there are lots of wonderful scholars, guest scholars and resident scholars. They are giving classes. And one part that I am really enjoying, it's like a greater course concept. For those who know greater course, there are selected scholars. They are giving educations in a short and brief, condensed version to people like you and me to enlighten us. For example, I really enjoying Sherman Jackson's, Black Muslims history, Afro-American Muslims in history in United States, 15 hours, and $9 a month. You can also enjoy those high-quality scholarship, scholarly talks and programs. And back to this bio reading. Have been born to Muslim Palestinian father and Christian American mother in Phoenix, Arizona, Jihad spent his college years traveling the Muslim world and exploring his roots and the Islamic tradition. He spent time in both the Islamic University of Medina, where he studied Arabic and Islamic studies, and Iran, where he studied Farsi, the University of Tehran, and the Qum. He completed his undergraduate study at the University of California, Berkeley, where he received his BA degree in History and Arabic. Jihad completed his master's degree at the University of Texas, Austin, in Arabic and Islamic law and jurisprudence. In 1999, Jihad began pursuing doctoral studies in Islamic law at the University of California, Los Angeles. He taught as an adjunct faculty for many years at UCLA and the Southern Western School of Law. Currently, Jihad is working on a doctorate in education at the University of Southern California. For past 15 years, Jihad has dedicated himself to improving relations between the Muslim and Christian communities of Southern California. Jihad co-founded the Muslim Christian Consultative Group comprised of major so-called Southern California Muslim leaders and representatives of mainline Protestant denominations, as well as the Catholic Archdiocese. This group pairs up mosques and churches nationally, mashallah, barakallah. He also co-founded the Greater Los Angeles Muslim Jewish Forum, which brings together major leaders of both faiths to improve relations and to address issues of common concern. Jihad is a founding board member of a Muslim Jewish peace organization, Regeneration, which is developing a model for education that nurtures understanding and peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians. Additionally, Jihad has committed himself to building bridges across faith communities to collaboratively address issues of homelessness and poverty. MashaAllah. Jihad has been consulted by the White House and has traveled around the world, Indonesia, Morocco, Qatar, and France, for the United States Department to speak to Muslim communities abroad and represent the American Muslim community. Jihad is a member of US Indo, an NGO that aims to strengthen ties between US and Indonesia. Jihad has been profiled on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, regularly appears on NPR and other news outlets, has appeared numerous times on the History Channel, and was featured in a documentary produced by the Annenberg Foundations, www.explore.org, about the Abrahamic faiths, entitled Traveling with Jihad. Jihad has received awards for his religious leadership by Congresswoman Jane Harman, the Valley Interfaith Council, and the South Coast Interfaith Council, and has been acknowledged as a local hero in 2008 by the World Festival of Sacred Music, was recently recognized as one of the 500 most influential people in Los Angeles by the LA Business Journal. So, Brother Jihad, you get my heart with your last name, but this bio, may Allah inshallah make you to example of a leader for us to follow to become better American Muslims. Floor is yours.
Inshallah. So thank you so much, Harun. Harun, that was supposed to be the bio that you edit down to just a sentence or two. You weren't supposed to read the whole thing. So I think that concludes our time here today. That took so long to read.
I couldn't stop, brother. The more I read,
watching.
yeah.
So,
the more I read, the more I enjoy, the more I said, these are good examples that I think our Turkish brothers and Muslims, a young generation, those whoever listens, to exemplify, like Suhaib, Webb, and you. I think we need to more leaders and practices like you and Suhaib, Webb, and many others, how to become better solvers of American problems, being Muslim in America. So, floor is yours.
I appreciate the sentiment. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. May Allah bestow His wisdom and guidance upon us, for we are in need of His wisdom and His guidance. We ask that He fill our hearts with love for Him and with a love for our fellow human beings, so that we may connect with other human beings in the attempt to fulfill our obligation of representing this faith, this deen, this religion to our fellow citizens here in the United States and those around the world. And do it with the kind of love and beauty that was expressed by our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam so many years ago, but whose example is as relevant and fresh for us today as it has ever been for humanity. Suhaib, who's the main speaker today, he set the bar for how to do a bio right. He sent me his bio. It's very short, and I really wish you would have shortened the bio I sent you, but I've learned my lesson. So I'm gonna introduce our guest, and we're just gonna have a conversation, because the topic on education and integration, I think, is a beautiful topic, and we're just going to have a conversation between the two of us, and everyone will be like a fly on the wall listening in until it's time to engage some questions from the audience. But Imam Suhaib William Webb has a degree in education from the University of Central Oklahoma. All right, where my mom is from as well, from Ponca City. And Islamic law. He has also a degree in Islamic law from Al-Azhar University in Cairo. He was named as a faith leader who to watch by the Center for American Progress in 2016, selected by the Muslim community as one of CNN's 25 most influential leaders, as well as one of the 500 most influential Muslims in the whole world, by the way, by the Royal Islamic Studies Center in 2020. He is currently the resident scholar at the Islamic Center of NYU, New York University, and teaches a course at NYU on Islamic law and ethics. He sits on the executive council of the North American Fiqh Council and on the advisory board of the Political Theological Network. His writings have appeared in the New York Times, and he has been on CNN, NBC, Al Jazeera, CBS, and more. He currently runs an online school, which we're going to talk about in a little while, that focuses on functional religious literacy within the context of North America, and that's called Swiss, and we're gonna get to that in a little bit. But first, let me welcome you, Imam Suhaib. I consider you a friend, a scholar, an inspiration to not only me, but to Muslims across the globe. And let me just welcome you, have you say a word, and then we're going to get right into the topic. Welcome.
Alhamdulillah, thank you. It's certainly a pleasure to be here with you and all of our brothers and sisters. And by the way, my mother was born in Ponca City.
Your mother as well. Okay, there we go. I did not know she was also from Ponca City.
Well, she's from Tonkawa, but born in Ponca City.
Okay, all right.
Same Qaria.
Same Qaria. There you go. So before we get into the issue of education, this topic is very interesting because it's aligned. It's talking about education and integration. So if we're going to talk about integration and then education within that context, the question that I think needs to be addressed right off the bat is, what's the landscape into which we are integrating, and who is the we? So what does this landscape look like? Who are the Muslims in America? What is the context here? And what does integration mean versus assimilation or melting pot, which is the metaphor that's been used in olden times to describe the way that immigrant communities merged into the dominant culture here in the United States. So what is this landscape? Just give us an overview.
Well, I mean, I think the Pew study is kind of the best at recognizing kind of the geographical makeup of the Muslim community in North America in its current iteration, right? And that is around 50% are African American, and the other 50% are largely South Asian and Arab, and then you have a large number of people, of course, from Africa. And a growing number of people from Somalia, except under Trump, right? But prior to Trump, and I think yesterday, President Biden said 125,000 a year wants to bring in refugees, immigrants. And then, of course, we have people from Bosnia from the 90s. One of the interesting things that's interesting about the influx of immigrants into America is that, ironically, many of those wars were started and supported by America. which is kind of like the irony. And when you look, whether it's Gulf War I or II, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Somalia, whether it's Bosnia is a different story. You know, that's where you can kind of see the growing communities. But the large community, 50% are Black American Muslims, mashallah. And then you know, large South Asian community. The Bengali community is exploding, right? Its numbers. You see in Dallas, you see in Queens. In Queens, I think there are 2 city councilmen. And then, of course, you have the Arabs in the Midwest, who also make up a sizable number in our community. And then the largest growing convert group at this current time are Latinos, which is, I think, incredibly exciting and exhilarating.
And you know, we find ourselves in a moment of time, but it's important to sort of look back and to say how we got here. I think the Pew study that you referenced puts us at about 3.3 million. You know, we've always said we're what, 6 million, 9 million, 11 million. You've heard different numbers. The low estimate, but it's the one that Pew came up with, is 1% of the US population, roughly. But we didn't just show up yesterday. And even, you know, if you could sort of give us a really quick summary of how we got to these numbers, both within the Black Muslim community, the Black American Muslim community, as well as the immigrant communities that were referenced in that Pew study.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I apologize. In the YouTube chat channel, they are asking Imam Suhaib if you can come closer to microphone a little bit, or you know, device, if it's possible.
yeah, unfortunately,
I apologize.
my daughter has lost my AirPods, so
Okay.
I have been searching, but unfortunately, we're not able to find them to procure the AirPods. So I'll do my best to speak as loud as I can. Jihad, you were saying something, sorry.
Yeah, I was saying, you know, we're here at what, 3.3 million, maybe more, but at least 1% of the US population. Half of us are immigrants or the children thereof, for the most part. I mean, you have some growing percentage of converts, but for the most part, majority of those numbers are from the immigrant community or the descendants thereof. And then you have a good half that are from the African American community. What's the background? How did we get here? What's the time frame by which those immigrants came and settled, and institution building and all of that? Because that also feeds into where we are at the educational landscape. Because, you know, if we're talking about how, you know, institutions that pass on the faith to the next generation, how did we get here? And what is that institutional landscape, and as well as the sort of historic trajectory that we are on as a community? And then, you know, also if you could talk about the interaction of those two communities, the African American community, a Muslim community, and the immigrant community and the descendants thereof.
Absolutely, and for each one of these groups, there's phenomenal academic writing that's been done. I can give a few names. There's a great book called The Black Crescent by Dr. Michael Gomez from NYU, yes. And Dr. Michael Gomez discusses the trajectory and the history of Black Muslims in America, starting, of course, with the enslavement of people in the Northwest Hemisphere, and in places like Haiti, places like the DR, the Dominican Republic, and especially in Bahia, Brazil, where, you know, in 1853, you have a revolt of Senegalese and Gambian Muslims under their tariqas, right? Their sheikhs lead what's called the Baha'i Revolt, which is the first armed insurrection against slavery in the Western Hemisphere. And this it becomes so powerful. Like, there's beautiful stories. Dr. Margarita Rios, who's at Rosa, excuse me, Margarita Rosa at Princeton, has actually translated the du'as of these tariqas. And it's beautiful to see that du'a is seen as, like, they felt a religious obligation to liberate themselves. They saw liberation as an obligation, and they even saved money to pay the zakat they would use to free their shuyukh. Like, these were incredibly powerful, dedicated Muslims, to the point that the Catholic Church said, let's just send them back to Senegal. So the first Muslim ban doesn't happen in 2016, right? The first Muslim ban happens in the middle of the 19th century under the guise of the Catholic Church, who says that no more Senegambian Muslims are allowed in the Northwest Hemisphere. And then from there, his book traces it up to some of the early iterations. You had Muslim, there are still records and documents. Professor Akbar Ahmed has documented the handwritten manuscripts of Muslims that were in Sepelos Islands in Georgia. Some of them actually wrote a book we studied, the Risala of Abi Zayd, the Maliki book. They had written this from their head, and they were buried with it. The churches there are facing the northeast. They don't have pews. They look like musallas. And then this, of course, leads us, this is a quick history, up into people like, Noble Drew Ali, Elijah Muhammad, 5% Nation, Nation of Islam, and you have Malcolm, and then you have this explosion. But it's important to note that there were great Black Sunni Muslim and Shia Muslim leadership in America pre-Malcolm. In Brooklyn, down the street from my former apartment, State Street Masjid was founded in 1923 by Imam Dawood Ahmed from Trinidad.
Yeah,
he's the guy in the pictures of Malcolm with the big white turban. He looks Sudani. That's Imam Dawood Ahmed from Brooklyn. And from his masjid comes Imam Jamil, comes Imam Siraj al-Hajj, comes countless numbers of Black leaders. As for others, this is incredible. I think Zahir Ali, by the way, Dr. Zahir Ali, who was at the Brooklyn Historical Society, may still be there, was actually doing a verbal narrative of the verbal historic narrative of Muslims in Brooklyn. And he shared with me that he found a group of Russians that had a mosque in Brooklyn in 1836. There's a Bosnian mosque in New York City, which is rumored to have been built in 1906, still there. There were Syrians in Gotham City, right? There was a masjid right there. And then, of course, in Union Square, Alexander Russell Webb, the white convert, was making the adhan. Then you have, of course, my father-in-law is Alsi from Libya, from Lebanon and Syria. This huge family of Alsis, you find them all sprinkled in Iowa, Idaho, Michigan, the Rust Belt states. They were the laborers, the Yemenites. And it's massive, man. That would be a conversation that we could have on our own. My wife's great-great-great-grandmother landed on Ellis Island, had her name changed to Alice, and entered America from Syria.
Wow.
So we are a mix in many ways. We are the antithesis of Trump and populism, right? We are this massive mix of cultures. You have a huge Ethiopian presence in DC. And we all bring something very powerful and unique. But what I think needs to be said too, is that we are the opposite of America. We're not baby boomers, we're booming babies. If the majority of America is over, say, 65 years old, as some studies say, our community, I think also according to Pew, is under 27. We're bottom heavy. So the needs of our community are largely going to be geared towards Generation Z, millennials, and some Generation X's.
So I love the picture that you're painting, and it's really a convergence, if you will, of enslaved, mostly African Muslims in both South America, but also here in the United States, who had their Muslim identity. Now, for those who've watched Roots, who are, I'm almost 50, I'll be 50 in July. So I'm an old guy. I remember when Roots came out on television, and Kunte Kinte, and that whole notion or narrative of how the brutality of American slavery stripped those slaves of their identity, and the Muslims, many of whom were Muslim, and the percentage, some 10 to 30% or more, 50, 40% might have been Muslim, Allahu Alam, but they mostly had their identities erased. Now, there's some documents, there's some incredible scholars, there's some wonderful documentaries that have portrayed the narratives of some of these individuals, some of whom obtained their freedom in U.S. history. But for the most part, the 1.5 million or so, 1.5 million African Americans that identify as Muslim today don't mostly trace their lineage back to those enslaved people who maintained an Islamic identity. There was this Black Power movement, as you mentioned, Marcus Garvey and Noble Drew Ali and eventually Elijah Muhammad, which crescendoed, if you will, in 1975 with the passing of the torch to Imam Warthaddin Muhammad, may Allah have mercy on him, who, when he embraced mainstream Islam, some estimates put it that over 1 million people followed him into the orthodoxy, the Sunni orthodoxy of mainstream Islam. And at the same time, you have these waves of immigrants that are coming, starting in the 1800s, in the 1880s, 1900, 1920, waves of immigrants coming from Arab countries, some from Bosnia and from Russia and from other places, coming in waves and establishing cultural centers oftentimes. Yeah, they had even some Arabic language newspapers and some Albanian newspapers and things like that, and cultural clubs. And one of my mentors and teachers, the late Dr. Meher Hathout, Allah yarhamu, he wrote a little booklet where he traces the waves of these immigrant Muslims from Muslim majority countries, not enslaved individuals, but immigrants. And he noticed that oftentimes they tried to hold on to their cultural identity, but within a generation or two, their children faded into the woodworks and lost their Islamic identity on the whole. And those institutions that were built, where they were Albanian language or Arabic language newspapers and cultural clubs, those kind of closed down, and people oftentimes changed their names and lost their identity, their religious identity. And it's only with the continuous waves of new immigrants that mosques began to be established in large number, in a critical mass. And in large part, as Dr. Jackson argues, the waves really started to increase from Muslim majority countries as a result of the civil rights movement and the efforts of the African-American Muslim community, or African-American community, I should say, who then opened up or liberalized the immigration policy so that it wasn't just Europe, but other countries. And a lot of Muslims started coming from India and other parts of the Muslim world, India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and other places. And there was an attraction, a brain drain from the Muslim world, but they came to the US as university students, many of them, and as laborers and working in Detroit in the auto industry, and established now mosques. And mosques that endured, because up until that point, a few mosques were established, but some of them didn't endure. The oldest one, I think, goes back to 1929. That's still operating as a mosque. I think there's an older one in Nebraska. But here we have now a convergence because of the civil rights movement and the efforts of African Americans. Larger numbers, critical masses of immigrant Muslims came in and started to reside here in the United States and build institutions, which leads me to my question. Mosques were kind of established early on, MSAs and then mosques. As those individuals, many of whom planned on studying here and going back, but ultimately settled and had children here, they faced the challenge of how to pass on the faith to the next generation, a problem that has not been solved, I would argue, until today, successfully. What would you say is the predicament for the American Muslim community now that we have the landscape where half of our community is African American and they have their own tradition and institutions, and there's a segregation, a de facto segregation, because of the way that the redlining and other things has segregated our this country for many centuries. But now we have these immigrant mosques or these immigrant communities trying to pass on the faith, and young people, are challenged in the way that it's presented. Tell us a little bit about how you see the issue of passing on the faith and the role of education in doing so. How is Islam understood and studied and passed on from generation to generation here in the United States?
Well, I think first is we can reflect historically, right? The historical record on religion in America paints a very powerful picture. Dr. Zahir Ali, again, kind of brilliantly reflects on this when he says that religious groups in America that did one thing succeeded, okay? Those that failed did the following. They completely assimilated. So those that completely assimilated You know, and our classical scholars, Shalabi talks about it's just gone. Like there's no vestiges of identity left. Number two are those who completely rejected America, right? Those who distance themselves, and not even in a strategic way, we're just not going to be part of the American project, also don't last long. The historical record shows that religious groups that have been able to survive America are those that thought about strategic and critical integration. And so this takes on a two-pronged meaning for many people, right? That is, if I'm an immigrant, I'm thinking about cultural integration. And if I'm Muslim, I'm thinking about religious integration. That could be a lot to handle. I mean, that's a lot going on. But either way, either one of those iterations that went too extreme didn't last, was not able to sustain itself. An example of a religious community that has thrived despite tremendous odds are the Catholics. Our friends in Utah, right? The Mormon community. The Jews, 6 Jews land in Rhode Island in the end of the 18th century, just 6 Jews, right? And so these are communities that thought about strategic integration and have, the Catholic community has thrived. The bigger challenge I think that we face is a challenge that postmodernity is presenting to all religious communities, but more so ours, because one thing that may need to be said is that after the 1960s, the majority of Muslims that are coming into America may be from secular backgrounds. They're not the laborer Yemenis that were working in the Ford factories in the 20s and 30s. They're people who fled from the Shah, right? And the Shah's a sunset, man. There are people who escaped even maybe what they saw as an overarching religious discourse. And they have not really invested in religious institutions, and especially education institutions. And what I mean is, if we look at Islamic colleges across the country, we have 2 to 3 of them. Do we have, until now, a place where we're training, outside of the great work you're doing, Islamic studies teachers? The Islamic studies teacher is a volunteer who may have lost a job and needed a gig at the nonprofit, or a college student who can't find a job over the summer. Like, that's not taking religious seriously. That's not creating educators. That's just getting by. And because of that, we're not thinking about education. We're not appreciating the intersection of culture, economics, politics, race, gender, immigration, with religion. And that leads me to what my suggestion is. I think the biggest problem is we do not have what God gave Adam first. We don't have names for things. We do not have an Islamic nomenclature that is going to provide people with words that explain religiously what's going on in their lives in America. And that creates this vacuum, Jihad. And that's why we hear oftentimes, even you and I will say, like, I just don't feel a connection, right? It's not the core I'm not connected to. I don't find the verbiage that I'm connecting to. So I think the bigger challenge is to appreciate the need for a nomenclature and ideas and thoughts that are rooted in that nomenclature that allow us to seamlessly synthesize religion with our lives. That is a major challenge in this country.
So I appreciate your description and narrative about how the Muslim community is not as strategic or as thoughtful. It's more haphazard in the way in which we are approaching the education of our children, of the next generation. And we are not tapping the best and brightest to go into the field of Islamic education, generally speaking.
And it's not a viable career option.
It's not.
It is not, and neither is being an imam. So if something is not a viable career option, why would I do it? right? There's
Yeah,
no value prop, right?
and you know, maybe to overgeneralize a little bit, but back home, wherever that may be, whether it's Turkey or you know, Egypt or Pakistan, if you are the top of your class, you go into medicine. If you are a close second, you're going into engineering, or you know, and then business. If you're connected and come from a wealthy family, if you don't have anything going on, you go to the madrasa. You know, and if that's the priority given to religious studies and the attitude towards those who study it, it's no surprise that we are not blessed with a more robust understanding of our faith that is well adjusted for the contemporary world in which we live, and is empowering us and educating us as community members to be able to navigate through these challenges. So we need to create a culture, I agree fully, that values religious education and that supports those who choose to go into that field and give them viable career options. Support your local imam with enough remuneration so that they can have a living wage and live with dignity as they are attempting to do this incredibly profound undertaking, which is to pass on faith, to help in the faith formation, the identity formation of the next generation of American Muslims. So how would you, you know, you talked about nomenclature. Expand on that a little bit. What do you mean by that? And how do we get out? How do we take this to the next level? I always say Islam is the most disorganized, organized religion on the planet. How do we become organized? How do we get ourselves in order? And what steps do we need to take in order to structure ourselves as a community to take knowledge and the religious education that we need seriously?
I'll answer that from an education perspective. That could go a lot of directions, right? And you know, it's interesting. This is not a surprise. Al-Mujaddid Badi'u Zaman al-Nursi, Allah yarhamu, he said, Al-Gharb hamilatu bil-Islam wa Sharq hamilatu bil-Gharb. Sayyid Badi'u Zaman al-Nursi, he said that the West is pregnant with Islam. He said this when he met Sheikh Hussein Makhlouf in Egypt, the Qal'a. When Sheikh Hussein Makhlouf asked Sayyid Zaman al-Nursi, how do you see the world? He said, Al-Gharb hamilatu bil-Islam wa Sharq hamilatu bil-Gharb. Right? That the West is pregnant with Islam. And I am from awladha. Wa anta min awladha. And we're from this offspring. And what I meant by nomenclature is Imam al-Zamakhshari says something very great in his tafsir, which demands critical reflection. And that is that God gave Adam the ability to name. And words are the pools of meaning, and meanings are the pools of culture. So what do we say? What would have happened to Adam if he did not have the ability to name things? So when we talk to young people, and even religious leadership, and you and I talked about this the other day, that is stuck in taqleed. You know how many religious leaders gave me a hard time for being on TikTok and told me it's nothing but haram, Snapchat haram. And I said, if you're a real educator, you want to listen to the people you claim to teach. You want to be able to take from them and formulate patterns, and then you create terms, ideas, and thoughts that are going to create an environment in the mind, furnishings of the mind, that are going to ease the application and understanding of Islam, and then allow people to synthesize Islam seamlessly into their daily life. Because you and I know this, right? Allah says, Mahya wa mamati lillah. He doesn't say hayati. He said hayati of being part of my life. Like in mahya kushi, my entire life. So we don't believe in Harvey Cox at Harvard, great professor, in his book, The Secular City. He talks about how religious communities do a big mistake, and that is when they pull out of secular society, they leave a vacuum that is going to be filled by the secular society. And then the religious community gets more upset that there's not enough religion. Well, you pulled out. But when we start to think about creating terminology, Snapchat Imam, or whatever, right? Terminology, and even a religious terminology, then we are able to create pools of meaning that lead to culture, that lead to synthesis. And this is what the late Dr. Farouqi, Allah yarhamu, on the Islamization of knowledge, right? This is what his point was. How do we begin to craft a language? And let's be honest, Jihad, young American Muslims have created a cultural language. Right? If you look at young American Muslims, it's not a theological language, it's a cultural language. And it's not necessarily bad. It has some drapings of theology, but they are engaged, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, they're out there, they're doing things, they're cultural producers. So they've crafted kind of a cultural language. In fact, they are more advanced in our religious leadership. Religious leadership has not crafted a religious language and given frameworks for activism, political engagement, and so many other things that are crucial to life.
I remember back in the 90s when I was at in the Bay Area in Santa Clara, and I was heading up the youth group there just as a volunteer in my early 20s, just coming back from the Islamic University Medina. So here there were these young kids, and we were studying Quran and Hadith and all of that in the youth group in the Sunday school. And Stanford is just around the corner. So it was time for the East-West football game, for those who are familiar. And so I said, all right, I want to take these kids on a field trip. We're going to go to the East-West football game. And we did. And when it came time for halftime, happened to coincide with I think it was Salat al-Asr. So we went, we found a nice clean place. We prayed Asr together, and then we went back and watched the rest of the game. And some of the parents, they were not okay with having their kids go to a football game. I mean, this was back in the 90s. Things have evolved since then, but we still have an issue there, because when we're talking about integration and something that you just mentioned, we can't pull out from society. And here, maybe we were consumers of entertainment, of football, but while we were there, we made our prayer, and it's a public place. People are seeing us attending football, which is as American as you can get, but also doing our devotion to God, expressing our devotion to God in a seamless way. And so for these kids who identify culturally as American, they are able to merge their worlds together of both being American and Muslim, and how to be Muslim in society at large. And so, oftentimes there's a bifurcation of identity, where you have young people who are very Muslim-y at home and in the mosque, but then they have a different personality, a totally different personality that they conceal from the Muslim community. And Muhammad becomes Mo, and they kind of hide their Muslimness. And it comes to a head when people go off to college, when they have freedom and they become completely secular, or they completely move away from their Islamic connection and connection to community and faith altogether. So how is it then, through this nomenclature, through this engagement in this secular space, but with an Islamic attitude, posture, demeanor, values, producing culture, expressing yourself in a way that is a value add to society, and also preserves and creates space for an expression of your connection to God in a way that doesn't create this split personality? You know what I'm talking about? Is this something that you can relate to, Imam Suhaib?
We all struggle with it to a certain degree. So when we talk about nomenclature, we're not just talking about words, we're talking also about like ideas. And all of this should really be formatted from Quran. If you think about what you talked about earlier, bifurcation of things. Why does Allah say always with the prophets, like, oh my people? Like, so immediately the Quran is positing us unconditionally, uncompromisingly in a space of being part of the community that we live in. We're not allowed now to say those people and me. Why the writers of the prophet's biography, it's profound, always begin with, these are the good qualities of the Jahili Arabs. This is brilliant, actually. It's teaching us, no matter what kind of people you're around, if you are living metaphorically in the office of a prophetic community, you need to be able to find diamonds in the soil. So even though these Arabs are buck wild, crazy, full of jahiliyyah, here's about 5 or 6 really good qualities. That's a nomenclature. That's an environment we've created where I'm not saying I'm Muslim and these are these people. At the same time, وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, right? I am not a polytheist. So there are certain things that I don't do. You know, even Taymiyyah, of all people, interestingly enough, in one of his judicial opinions says, Islam didn't come to destroy anyone's culture. It came to polish it. So by crafting and I said this once at ISNA about 12 years ago, you guys are not going home. You're not going home, man. And we definitely have to respect our relatives and families overseas and be there to help them. But our long-term investment has to be here. Because most of our kids, you saw this, right? In 9/11 and even the recent Arab Spring, a host of families left America, took their kids, and went back home. And what happened, Jihad? How long did they last?
They came right back.
and why did they come right back? Because of who?
Because they're kids.
Used a different set of names, terms, ideas. And we're not saying America is better. I don't like the American Universal. It just has a different way of thinking. So we have to be invested in crafting a culture that is rooted in theology, appreciates the cultural context, encourages Muslims to be cultural contributors through different means, right? Through different avenues, through different perspectives. Yaqub says to his kids, "Udkhulu abwab mutafarriqa." Go into society through different doors. We don't want everyone, as Dr. Sherman says, to be a sheikh or a mullah. Of course not. Let's go through different doors. So I think that's really going to be key, is thinking about education, engaging in the training of educators, moving beyond theory into practical application, and then being there to support Muslims throughout their lives as they continue to struggle with the integration and the intersection of faith and life.
So I have two questions that I want to get to. I know time's getting a little bit short and we might have some questions. So Haroon, please forward on to me any questions that are coming up in the chat room. But two questions, and I'll just give you both questions now and I'll let you tackle them as you see fit. The first one is just an appreciation of the way that you are approaching the education of younger people in particular. You have traveled abroad, you've acquired traditional knowledge, and you reference with facility, without any, it was seamless. The way that you integrate, Zamakhshari or who was it that you quoted just a minute ago?
Zaman.
Yeah, Badi'a Zaman.
Zaman here, man. You'll be in trouble.
There you go. So, but in a seamless fashion into the same conversation in which you're talking about, a Drake song or some popular television series or movie. And so it creates this culturally connected, culturally relevant association of ideas that are both universal and particular at the same time, and resonates with young people who hear you speak and who attend your classes. And you've created this vehicle, this platform that allows people to really to grow in their faith and have that foundation called Suhaib Webb Institute of help me out there of Islamic Studies, right? So if you can tell us a little bit about that, and then also my second question is connect it to the Turkish American experience and touch upon also the issue of Turks and what their integration trajectory is like, especially for young people, given the racialization of this country, and how someone who's from Turkey, for example, a child whose parents are from Turkey, can very easily fit into this culture because of the color of their skin, and how that becomes both, there's a privilege there, but a danger because you can also lose yourself in that process. So they're two different questions. I'm just giving them to you both because we have limited time, and I want you to tackle both if you don't mind. Start out with Swiss, and then also touch the issue of the Turkish American community and the integration versus assimilation for this particular community in question.
Well, and one thing, we may not have time to talk about it. I mean, we saw it a month ago in DC here, is that America is in a great time of splintering. America is splintering. Postmodernity has really gone on steroids, right? And people are not able to understand the speed at which they perceive the world to be changing. So to find stability in a Mach 1 world change, people buy into meta-narratives. What Berger calls plausibility structures, right? In his great book, Sacred Canopy. And sometimes those meta-narratives are simply not true. For example, if we all go to Washington, D.C., the Messiah, Donald Trump, is going to save us. That's a meta-narrative that large percentage of Americans believe, right? ISIS is a meta-narrative that we have to purify the earth of evil Muslims by killing them in order for, the Khilafat to come back. And sometimes these meta-narratives are invoked. White supremacy is a meta-narrative, invoked in a way which either is benign or, for example, the evangelical community's alliance with Zionism and the removal of Palestinians from Palestinian land, because that way Jesus will come, right? Theodicy on steroids, if you will. For us as Muslims, we need to be aware of this because this is also impacting our community. When we don't respect, say, immigrant culture. I myself, as a white American convert, have benefited tremendously from the wisdom of older uncles, right? And just a perspective that's very different than my own. American Universal tends to reject, because youth in America is commodified. Everyone wants to be young, so money is in the youth, which means we don't value the old. That's very antithetical to us. So America is a state of splintering, Jihad. And we see this and there's a number of great books in the academy. One is called The Death of, I have it here somewhere. One is called The Public Revolt by Martin Gorey, which is absolutely phenomenal about there is really no respect for specialization. Like there's no respect for the mutakhassis. Everybody knows. So now vaccines, right? This is a symptom of this. Vaccines are a lie. There's a graph inside the vaccine. So one of the things that we decided when we started to put Swiss together about 7 years ago was how do we use religious knowledge as a centering mechanism to maintain some kind of anchorage in a world that's moving really fast, man. And even within the Muslim community, we find like the meta-narrative, I'm like the traditional scholar, I'm like Abu Hanifa. This is like the meta-narrative where I'm going back to the days of the son of Saleh. I want to live Ihya Ayyam al-Ghazali. You're not going to make Ihya. Imam al-Ghazali mat mundu zaman. He died a long time ago. You're responsible for making Ihya now. So Swiss started as number one, an effort to provide people with like anchorage and centering. The second thing is that we noticed is that people were looking for dysfunctional scholarship instead of functional literacy. So our focus is functional literacy. What do I need? What do I mean by functional religious literacy? What do I need to deal with my own doubts, to strengthen my own faith? How do I preserve faith amongst my family? And then if I'm in a public square, how am I able to impact, say, my job, my work? We don't tell people, this is a meta-narrative. You're going to go and change the world. You're not going to go and change the world. Like very few people change the world. You may change diapers. And you'll go to Jannah for changing diapers. But you don't necessarily have to change the world. So our idea was how do we focus on functional, on the ground, practical, not a lot of nazariyat, right? But more of tatbiqat, application. And then the third, and this happened when I got on Snapchat, I had students around years ago, like, you should get on Snapchat. I was like, no, astaghfirullah, what's the Snapchat bid'ah? Whatever. I said, no, get on Snapchat. So I got on Snapchat and it just exploded. Next thing I know, I looked at it, it's like 25,000 views in a day. So I said, man, what is this, right? And then I started trying to shift my role from being the teacher to seeing myself as a student of a younger generation, right? And as someone that's trained in education, you know, we have rubrics and we have assessment mechanisms that allow us to think about how thinkers think. And that caused me also to start to see patterns and questions. I was like, why aren't these questions answered? You know, why am I getting this question with so much at a time? So I started to write these questions down, research them, and answer, research and answer. So that led us to realize that, and we were actually going to launch next year, but when COVID hit, we just jumped online and launched with, and we started with around 400 kids. We have also around 18 to 1900 adults. We focus on something which is affordable. It's $9.99 for the whole household. Well, I like your cost as well. We also provide training from myself. Everyone that teaches there has at least a degree in religious studies, and we appreciate if they actually have a degree in education as well. We take people through kind of an Azhar American West African curriculum that is purposely framed in a way that the language is accessible. The language is our language. The language is something that we don't have to kind of create a second translation for. And also we provide personal one-on-one mentorship for people. So we don't just have people, you know, people walk into the gym and they don't know what to do, right? We actually have like academic advisors that follow up with people. And our program is a 5-year program. We're going to be opening up an app soon in the month of Ramadan. We're going to have personal trainers for people in the month of Ramadan to help them out. We have around 250 people on scholarship right now. We have a girl, for example, in Gujarat who converted to Islam secretly as a Hindu. She's doing our program with us. We have a convert, of course, hiding her Islam from her family. We have 2 or 3 of them. And then also we have a program for adults, right, that touches on 3 core issues: theology, practice, and spirituality. We also run programs that talk about how to raise your children, how to facilitate teaching religion at home. We do movie nights, we do game nights. So we do a lot of stuff, man, and we kept it accessible, meaningful, functionable, as well as transparent and affordable. And that was really the goal that we set out with. And we kept everything online. So when COVID happened, we just did it, and it just really, really took off.
Beautiful. Harun, can you put the link for that in the chat room? I know that you were showing the website, but if you could just put the link so people can go into that chat,
Sure.
copy it, and then save that in their before we conclude our program. And you did.
I was going to highlight your institute and Imam's institute on the last portion of the meeting, but I'm going to put in chat right now too. We just put it.
Very good. This is the last portion of the meeting. We only have a few minutes left. So inshallah. So, and you did touch upon the second question, which is, you know, and someone put in the chat room here as well, what, you know, how to have an integrated Muslim American household, especially for immigrant parents. So if you're born and raised in Turkey and you're coming here and you're having children here, how do you create that balanced, integrated culture, Muslim American culture, where the children don't end up with that split personality syndrome that we talked about earlier? You mentioned that it's part of the program and you platform, and you have also many faculty, many teachers, as in addition to yourself on that platform, which are they're incredible. Yeah, they're incredible. Yeah,
it's actually on our faculty.
What's that?
The Imam of the first mosque in America is actually on our faculty, Sheikh Hassan.
Who's that?
He's from Azhar.
MashaAllah.
And I think also one thing is that question, if you don't mind me jumping in, is that going back to my first point of centering, what do we mean when we say centering? Because we all these cool words that have no meaning, right? But that means that we see ourselves, whether with parents, with young people, or even couples, as a partner to enhance and improve your relationships through religious education. So instead of, you know, the mom seeing me as the pawn that can be used against her son, or the son seeing me as a pawn that can be used in a proxy war against his mom. We're like, no, how can we help you become better as a family? How does religious education improve that? And that I think is key also. Like, how do we bring ta'leef instead of tafriq? Through religious studies. And we've been able, luckily, by Allah's grace, we're not perfect, of course. We're still in a beta phase. We're not like bayan, mashallah. But our focus is people that are looking for like the street disciple, like Nas talked about, right? The public education, right? We're public educators. We don't tell people we're going to make you scholars. We're not going to make you scholars. We're going to make you functionable. And function means that I have to immediately appreciate the cultural context that you have, not that I have, right? Because I can't export my culture to you and expect you then to live that, right? You have your own set of optics. And that also, as I finish, forces us to be good learners. So we believe, like, as a culture, that we have to constantly be in the water with people and constantly relearning the experiences. And like, for example, now spirituality, jihad is very different than what you and I experienced in the 90s, simply because this is the age of exhibition. Everyone is told to be an influencer. Everyone's told to jump and get attention. So riyah, the idea of riyah is very different than riyah in Ghazali's time. Right now, riyah can be commodified. What does Tasawwuf in 2021 say about the commodification of exhibition? Right, so that's kind of where we need to think. And added to that is political theology. What is the political theology in America? Right, you and I noticed this, that there were a large number of religious leaders who either completely wrote a blank check to political activists, or simply criticized them constantly. You experience this in LA, right? My argument to both sides of those religious leaders was, and Altaf Hussein also, we said to them, what are the frameworks that you provided for political activists to measure? You haven't given them Allah, that's what I meant by nomenclature, ideas. They don't even have measurements that you're going to criticize them. So if anyone wants to blame, we should blame religious scholars that are not providing religious frameworks within the political sphere of America and thinking critically about what is Islamic political theology in America. It's not that, except I think maybe Dr. Sherman, a few other people. But I mean, they chastised Lyndon, man. They chastised Ilhan. They chastised Andre. They chastised Keith. They chastised these people, but they never provided them with a framework to measure their work through. And that's what I meant by not having a culture, a nomenclature, not having a reference point. So we try to contribute to that in a grassroots, practical level.
Beautiful. Well, this is a wonderful niche where we only have, I think, 5 minutes left in the program. And I wanted to, first of all, thank you for your time. I know that you have a lot of demands on your schedule, and the community that was brought together here by Harun and his organization is thirsty for the kind of replenishment, spiritual replenishment that you brought to us tonight, and that we look to continue to turn to as a spring, as a well, that we can quench our thirst at Swiss. We can find our way through the trainers that you have on there, the coaches, the spiritual trainers, so that we can come out of the other end of Ramadan, which is only 2 months away now, stronger than ever, with not just a deeper connection to Allah, but a greater clarity as to how to express that connection to Allah in our families first and in our society and community at large. It is the month of February, which is Black History Month. And one of the things that Harun shared with me just before we started is this wonderful book that was produced, a children's book. And there's also an adult version, but there's a children's book on the beloved companion Bilal ibn Rabah. And I'm going to conclude here our portion and then hand it over to Harun. But I was wondering if you could just give us a short dua, Imam Suhaib, and then Harun will close with a few announcements. But Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much, Suhaib, for joining us tonight, and for Harun for hosting us, and for all of you who came and attended this program. And hopefully we'll continue on your journey of knowledge and education through Swiss. Jazakumullah khair, Imam Suhaib.
Feel free to visit, suhaibweb.com. $9.99 for your whole family. It's not $9.99 per person. So we look forward to seeing our Turkish brothers and sisters there, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bi asma'ihi kulliha wa sifatil ula. We ask Allah by all of his names and attributes to give us tawfiq, right? To give us success and to give us the bravery and the guidance to overcome our insecurities and our fears, to truly be pleasing to him subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the guidance to synthesize our lives in a way that allows us to posit our entire existence as best we can for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah to provide us knowledge of benefit and to make us a benefit with the knowledge he's provided. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to unite us with our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to make us those who can heal our own community, restorative healing, and constructive healing. Bi-iznillah. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun. Wassalamun ala al-mursalin. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Thank you so much, Imam Suhaib. Harun, take us on.
Thank you. This was wonderful moderator, performance, and wonderful speech by Imam. And I think this is first, not last, that we would like to get benefits from both of you. I would like to highlight upcoming events that we are going to organize in the United States, wide, or Canada, for Sister Shahida Sharial Haq, write couple books. And this is the Black History Month. And this is our local, bookstore published this book. And sales are not great, but it should be. So we are promoting this book, and hopefully we are going to make book competition, online questions, just like Imam Suhaib Webb that he pushed beta version. We are going to push, inshallah, online book, test for our kids between age to 12 years. And this is 52 pages with the wonderful illustrations. So those sisters and brothers who cannot afford this book, inshallah, we will find up to 50 people sponsor and mail this book to understand and create empathy among the societies and history of the, Bilal Habashi radiallahu anh. They are the stars, and inshallah it will lead us to understand and create empathy for Afro-Americans, Muslim experience in the United States too. So I just want to emphasize on this. And this is the book, this is the link we are going to share on the chat. And inshallah, we will have a book discussion too, book reading for the kids for the age of 12, and also book reading competition at the end of February for this book. Again, thank you very much to those brothers and sisters who participate in this program. I want to thank our moderator, our Imam, and inshallah, let's keep in touch. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, abadan daiman. Thank you.